Open your legs. I don't stop until my child is inside you. That was the first thing my husband ever said to me on our wedding night. Not I love you. Not you're beautiful. Not even a simple hello. Just cold, absolute ownership delivered in a voice that had sent men to their graves without a single raised hand. My name is Olivia Hayes, and this is the story of how I was sold to a monster and somehow ended up loving him. I was 20 years old when my father drove me to the airport and told me we were going on a vacation. A father-daughter trip to Italy, he said, just like when I was a little girl. He smiled at me from the driver's seat, that familiar, easy grin that had always made me believe everything would be okay. And because I was 20 and still stupid enough to trust the man who raised me, I believed him. I packed my favorite sundress and a worn copy of my college psychology textbook because I had midterms in 2 weeks and my professor was ruthless about late assignments. I kissed my mother goodbye at the kitchen door, watched her wave from the porch as we pulled away, and had no idea that would be the last time I ever saw our little house in Savannah, Georgia. The last time I would ever feel like Olivia Hayes, normal college student, instead of Olivia De Luca, property of the most dangerous man in Sicily. The flight was long and my father barely spoke. He ordered whiskey after whiskey until the flight attendant started giving him concerned looks. I asked him what was wrong, and he just shook his head and said, "Business stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." I should have worried. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed the way his hands shook when he signed the customs form, the sweat on his forehead despite the airplane's freezing air conditioning. But I didn't, because I still believed my father would never hurt me. We landed in Palermo just after sunrise. The airport smelled like cigarette smoke and lemon blossoms, and for about 30 seconds, I was genuinely excited. Italy. I had never been anywhere outside the American South, and here I was, stepping into a world of ancient stone and Mediterranean sun. I remember thinking this would be a story I told my grandchildren someday. The summer, I went to Italy with my dad. Then the car came. Black. Tinted windows. No license plate that I could see. 2 men in dark suits got out, and one of them took my suitcase without asking. My father just nodded at them like he was expecting them, like he knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. My stomach dropped. Every instinct I had been ignoring for weeks finally screamed at full volume. Get back on the plane. Run. Scream. Do something. But my father grabbed my arm with a grip that was nothing like the gentle hands I remembered from childhood, and he pulled me toward that black car like I weighed nothing at all. The drive took almost 2 hours. We left Palermo behind and climbed into hills covered in olive groves and vineyards. The road narrowed until it was barely wide enough for one car, and the men in the front seat never spoke. My father stared out his window, his jaw tight, and I sat in the back like a prisoner being transported to a sentence I hadn't yet been told. The villa appeared at the end of a private road lined with cypress trees. It was massive, all warm stone and climbing ivy, with iron gates that closed behind us the moment we passed through. I counted at least a dozen men in suits standing at intervals around the property. Some of them had earpieces. Most of them had guns visible at their hips. This wasn't a vacation home. This was a fortress. My father finally looked at me as the car stopped. His eyes were red. His face was gray. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. And when he spoke, his voice cracked. "Olivia, I need you to listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever they say, just agree. Please, just agree. For your mother. For me. For all of us." Before I could ask what he was talking about, the door opened and a man was there. He was older, maybe mid-60s, but age hadn't softened him. If anything, it had carved him into something harder. He had silver hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome once, before violence and power had reshaped it into something colder. His eyes were dark and completely unreadable, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was already calculating my worth. He said something in rapid Italian to my father, and my father bowed. Actually bowed, like this was the Middle Ages and this man was royalty. I wanted to laugh or scream or both, but I couldn't make a sound. Because in that moment, I finally understood. My father hadn't brought me here for a vacation. He had brought me here to pay a debt. They let us inside. The villa was even more beautiful on the inside than the outside, all frescoed ceilings and marble floors and paintings that probably cost more than my entire childhood home. I noticed none of it. I was too busy trying to find an exit, a window, a door, anything. But everywhere I looked, there were more men in suits. More guns. more cold eyes watching me like I was something they were waiting to devour. We were taken to a sitting room that could have fit my entire college dorm inside it. The older man sat in a leather chair that was positioned like a throne at the far end of the room. He crossed his legs slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world and knew we had none. My father stood in front of him like a schoolboy called to the principal's office, and I stood behind my father, my hands shaking at my sides. The older man looked at me for a long time. Not at my face, at my body, at my hips and my chest and my hands like he was examining livestock at an auction. Then he looked at my father and spoke in English this time, his voice deep and accented but perfectly clear. She is healthy? No diseases? No problems that would prevent childbearing? My father nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yes. Yes, she's healthy. She's always been healthy. Strong. Good grades. She's never even had a broken bone. The older man nodded like this was acceptable. Then he looked back at me and smiled. And that smile was the coldest thing I have ever seen. You will call me Don De Luca. You are my husband now. I thought I misheard him. I actually looked around the room expecting someone to jump out and say, just kidding. This is a prank. You're on camera. But no one laughed. No one smiled. The men in suits just stood there with their hands clasped in front of them, and my father stared at the floor like he was already dead. What did you just say? My voice came out high and thin, nothing like the strong, independent woman I thought I was. Don De Luca stood up. He was taller than I expected, at least 6'3", with shoulders that hadn't softened with age. He walked toward me slowly, and I backed up until I hit a wall and couldn't go any further. He stopped inches from my face, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine and utterly terrifying. Your father owes me $3 million. He borrowed to save his business, then borrowed more to pay the interest, then borrowed more still because he is a fool who thought he could gamble his way out of a hole he never should have dug in the first place. Don De Luca's voice was calm, almost conversational. He cannot pay. He will never be able to pay. So we have made an arrangement. His debt is forgiven in exchange for you. You will marry me. You will live in my home. You will bear my children. And in return, your father lives. Your mother lives. Your family keeps their home and their restaurant and whatever is left of their dignity. I looked at my father. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there with his shoulders slumped and his hands hanging at his sides. This man who had taught me to ride a bike and walk me to school on my first day and promised me he would always protect me. He had sold me. He had actually sold me like I was a car or a house or a debt to be settled. You can't be serious. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face without my permission. This is illegal. This is human trafficking. I'm an American citizen. The embassy will. Don De Luca laughed. It was a quiet sound, almost gentle, and that made it worse than any cruel laugh could have been. The embassy will do nothing. You are in my country now, Olivia. My city. My home. The police report to me. The judges owe me favors. The American government has bigger problems than one missing college student. You have no power here. No rights. No escape. You belong to me now, and the sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be. He turned and walked back to his chair, settling into it like a king returning to his throne. The wedding is in 3 days. You will spend that time preparing. There are women here who will teach you what you need to know. Do not try to run. Do not try to fight. Do not make me hurt your father to prove a point. I would prefer not to, but I will. Make no mistake about that. Then he waved his hand, and 2 women appeared from nowhere and led me away. I looked back at my father as I left, hoping for something, an apology, an explanation, a sign that he was going to fix this. But he just stood there, staring at the floor, and I realized he had already accepted this. He had already made peace with selling his only daughter to a monster, and I hated him for it. I hated him with a fury I had never felt before in my entire life. The room they put me in was beautiful. Antique furniture, silk curtains, a bed so large it could have fit my entire dorm room inside it. The windows had iron bars on them, decorative but strong, and when I tried the door after the women left, it was locked from the outside. I was in a cage. A beautiful, expensive cage, but a cage nonetheless. I sat on the edge of that massive bed and cried until I had nothing left. I cried for my mother, who had no idea where I really was. I cried for the future I had lost, the college degree I would never earn, the normal marriage I would never have to a man I actually chose. And then, when the tears were gone, I got angry. I paced the room for hours, testing every window, checking every corner, searching for anything I could use as a weapon or a tool. I found nothing useful, just expensive decorations and soft fabrics, and the kind of luxury that felt like a mockery of my situation. Around midnight, I heard voices in the hallway, my father's desperate tone and Don De Luca's calm responses. I pressed my ear against the door, but couldn't make out the words. Whatever they were saying, it didn't matter. The deal was done. I was the payment. The next morning, a woman named Rosa came to my room. She was maybe 50, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of my grandmother. She brought breakfast and coffee and sat with me while I ate, not speaking, just watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, she said, "I was brought here too. 30 years ago. From a village in Calabria. My father owed a debt, just like yours." I looked up at her, startled. "You were sold too?" She nodded. "To Don De Luca's older brother. He is dead now. Cancer. But I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. This life, it is not what you think. These men, they are hard. They are dangerous. But they are also loyal. Protective. If you give them a chance, they will move mountains for you." I wanted to hate her for saying that. For normalizing this. For making it sound like being sold to a stranger was just a different kind of arranged marriage. But there was no judgment in her voice, no cruelty. Just tired wisdom. Just survival. "I don't want to marry him," I said. "I don't want any of this." Rosa sighed. "I know. But wanting does not matter anymore. Only surviving. Only making the best of what you have been given. Don De Luca is not a cruel man. He is not gentle either, but he is fair. He will not hurt you without reason. And if you bear him children, he will treasure you for the rest of your life." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I would rather die than have this man's children? That I would never stop trying to escape? Rosa seemed to understand because she patted my hand and stood up. "The Italian lessons start today. You will need them. And the self-defense training starts tomorrow. Don De Luca insists all his wives learn to protect themselves." That surprised me. He wants me to learn self-defense? Rosa smiled slightly. "He wants you to be strong. Weak wives die, Olivia. Strong wives survive. Don De Luca has no interest in a wife who cannot survive." The next 3 days passed in a blur of lessons and preparations. I learned basic Italian phrases, enough to say yes and no and thank you and please don't hurt me. I met with a tailor who measured every inch of my body for a wedding dress I didn't want. I sat through endless lectures from Rosa about the De Luca family history, the alliances and rivalries, the men I would need to impress, and the women I would need to watch. And every night, Don De Luca came to my room. He didn't touch me, didn't threaten me. He just sat in the chair by the window and watched me, his dark eyes following my every movement. Sometimes he asked questions. What did I study in school? What were my hobbies? Did I want children someday? I answered as briefly as possible, hating him for pretending this was normal, hating myself for answering at all. On the third night, the night before the wedding, he stayed longer than usual. The sun had set hours ago, and the room was dark except for one small lamp. He sat in his chair, legs crossed, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You are still afraid of me," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," I said. "You bought me. You're forcing me to marry you. Why wouldn't I be afraid?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have killed men. Many men. Some deserved it. Some did not. I have ordered deaths and watched them carried out. I have done things that would make your American blood run cold." He paused, tilting his head. "But I have never forced a woman. I have never taken what was not offered freely. And I will not start with you." I stared at him. "Then why are you doing this? Why not just take the money? Why not just kill my father and be done with it?" Don De Luca stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the garden below, his back to me. "Because I am 67 years old. My first wife died 20 years ago. My children from that marriage are dead or estranged. I have no one, Olivia. No heir. No legacy. No one to carry on what I have built. I need a wife. I need children. And your father offered you." "He offered me because he's a coward," I spat. Don De Luca turned back to me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something like sympathy in his eyes. "Yes, he is. But so are most men when faced with death. Your father chose to live. He chose to let you save him. That is not right, and I will not pretend it is. But it is the reality you now live in." He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "I will not force you on our wedding night. I will not force you ever. But I will wait, Olivia. I am a patient man. I have waited decades for many things. I can wait for you to come to me willingly. And you will. Eventually. Then he was gone, and I was alone with my thoughts and my fear and the terrible possibility that he might be right. The wedding was held in the villa's private chapel. A priest who looked more terrified than reverent performed the ceremony in Italian, words I barely understood but repeated anyway because Rosa had coached me for hours. I wore the white dress the tailor had made, layers of silk and lace that fit me perfectly because of course Don De Luca had my exact measurements. My father was not there. Don De Luca had decided he did not deserve to give away what he had already sold. I walked down the aisle alone, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists at my sides. The chapel was small but beautiful, all gold leaf and stained glass, and the smell of old incense. Don De Luca stood at the altar in a three-piece suit that probably cost more than my college tuition, his silver hair slicked back, his dark eyes fixed on me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. When I reached him, he took my hands in his. His palms were warm and rough, scarred in ways that told me he had not always commanded violence from a distance. He had been in the trenches. He had done the dirty work himself. And those hands were now wrapped around mine, claiming me in front of God and whoever else mattered in this world. I spoke my vows in a voice that did not shake, looking into his cold eyes and feeling nothing but hatred and terror. When he slid the ring onto my finger, a massive diamond that felt like a weight I would carry forever, I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I smiled. I played the part. And when he kissed me, brief and possessive, I did not pull away. Afterward, there was a reception. Champagne and food and dozens of people I didn't know congratulating me on a marriage I had never wanted. I smiled and nodded and said thank you in my halting Italian, and no one seemed to notice that my eyes were dead, that I was already planning my escape. That night, I stood in Don De Luca's bedroom, which was now my bedroom as well. I had changed into a nightgown Rosa had left for me, white silk that fell to my knees and made me feel exposed despite covering everything. My hands shook as I heard his footsteps in the hall, heard the door open and close. I expected violence, or at least demand. Expected to be used like the property I now was. But Don De Luca walked past me to the window, loosening his tie without looking at me. "You are afraid," he observed, his back still turned. "What do you think?" I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. He turned then, his eyes traveling over me with an expression I could not read. "I told you I would not force you. I meant it. Tonight you will sleep. I will sleep in the adjoining room. And we will begin to build something that is not based on fear." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or insulted. So what was the point of all this? The wedding, the threats, the control? "The point," Don De Luca said, walking toward me slowly, "is that you are mine now. Legally, publicly, completely. But I am patient enough to wait until you stop seeing me as your enemy and start seeing me as your husband. I will never see you as anything but the man who bought me," I said, my voice shaking with rage and unshed tears. Don De Luca stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. "We will see," he said quietly. "Now sleep. You are exhausted. And tomorrow, your real education begins." He left me then, walking to the attached sitting room and closing the door behind him. I stood alone in the massive bedroom, trying to understand what had just happened. Don De Luca, the ruthless Don who had forced me into marriage, had just given me the first night of my imprisonment without laying a hand on me. I didn't trust the gesture, but I couldn't deny the relief flooding through my body. I climbed into the bed and cried myself to sleep. The weeks that followed were strange. Don De Luca kept his word. He did not touch me, did not pressure me, did not even look at me in a way that made me feel threatened. He slept in the sitting room every night, and every morning he was gone before I woke up. We took meals together sometimes, dinner in his private study or breakfast on the terrace overlooking the gardens. He asked about my day, my lessons, my training. He told me about his business, carefully edited to remove the worst parts, and about his childhood in Sicily, and about his first wife, who he had loved deeply. I hated how human he seemed, how normal. I wanted him to be a monster, because monsters were easy to hate. But Don De Luca was not a monster. He was just a man. A dangerous man, yes. A man who had done terrible things, absolutely. But also a man who was trying, in his own way, to make this arrangement work. The Italian lessons continued, and I got better. By the end of the first month, I could hold basic conversations. By the end of the second, I could understand almost everything said around me. And that was when I realized that being able to understand Italian meant I could now hear the things people said about me when they thought I didn't understand. The whispers at parties. The jokes at my expense. The speculation about whether I was a virgin, whether I would give Don De Luca a son, whether I would survive this world or end up like his first wife, dead before her time. The self-defense training was the hardest part. Marco, my instructor, was a former military man who treated me like a recruit, not a Don's wife. He pushed me until my muscles burned and my lungs screamed and my hands bled from hitting the training dummies. He taught me how to break holds, where to strike to cause maximum damage, how to recognize threats before they materialized. At first, I went through the motions half-heartedly, seeing it as another form of control. But gradually, as my body grew stronger and my reflexes faster, I began to feel something like power. Not enough to escape Don De Luca's world, but enough to not feel completely helpless within it. Don De Luca watched my progress from a distance. He would appear at the edge of the training room sometimes, standing silently with his arms crossed, his eyes tracking every movement I made. I could feel his gaze like a physical weight, assessing and calculating. But he never interfered, never commented, never approached me during training. It was as though he was waiting for something, though I could not imagine what. 1 month after the wedding, Don De Luca informed me that we would be attending a gathering of important Italian families. I would be presented as his wife publicly for the first time, and my behavior would reflect on his reputation. I wanted to refuse, wanted to say something defiant and cutting, but I had learned enough about his world to know that public rebellion would only bring private consequences. So I nodded and allowed Rosa to dress me in an expensive gown, deep burgundy silk that hugged my curves and fell to the floor in elegant lines. Don De Luca wore a tuxedo that made him look like he belonged in old Hollywood films, elegant and dangerous all at once. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly for me to identify. "You look beautiful," he said. It was the first compliment he had ever given me. "I look like property being displayed," I replied, unable to help myself. Don De Luca's expression hardened slightly. "You look like my wife. And tonight you will act like it. These people will judge you, will look for weakness, will test you at every opportunity. Do not give them the satisfaction." The gathering was held in a palazzo that made the villa look modest. All marble columns and frescoed ceilings and champagne that probably cost more per bottle than my monthly rent used to be. I walked beside Don De Luca, my hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling dozens of eyes turn our way. The whispers started immediately. "She is so young. Where did he find her? Does she even speak Italian?" I kept my face carefully neutral, the way Don De Luca had taught me without actually teaching me, just by modeling that same control every single day. We moved through the crowd, Don De Luca introducing me to men with cold eyes and women with calculating smiles. Everyone was polite to my face, but I could feel their judgment, their questions, their certainty that I did not belong in this world of power and violence and old European money. Then a man approached us. He was younger than Don De Luca, maybe in his 50s, with the kind of handsome features that had probably gotten him anything he wanted when he was younger. He greeted Don De Luca warmly in Italian, then turned his attention to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "This is your new wife," he said in English, his eyes traveling down my body with obvious appreciation. "You always did have excellent taste, Vincent." Don De Luca's hand tightened on my waist, a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. "Thank you, Marcello." "Olivia, this is Marcello Rossi, an old associate." Marcello took my free hand and kissed it, his lips lingering longer than necessary. "So beautiful. And so young. Tell me, Cara, what does a girl like you see in a man like Vincent?" The question was designed to embarrass, to undermine, to make me feel like the bought property I was. I felt Don De Luca's body tense beside me, felt the room's attention focusing on us, waiting to see how I would respond. I pulled my hand away from Marcello with deliberate slowness, then looked him directly in the eye. "I see a man who does not need to ask stupid questions to feel powerful. Perhaps you should try it sometime." The room went silent. Marcello's smile froze on his face, his eyes flashing with anger. Several people nearby made small sounds of shock or amusement. I held Marcello's gaze, refusing to back down. my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then Don De Luca did something that shocked everyone, including me. He laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that cut through the tension like a knife. "My wife," he said, his voice carrying pride I did not expect, "is clearly capable of handling herself. Perhaps next time, Marcello, you will remember that." They moved away from Marcello, who stood frozen with humiliation, and I realized I was shaking. Don De Luca guided me to a quieter corner of the room, his hand steady on my back. "That was dangerous," he said quietly, but I could hear approval in his voice. "Also magnificent. Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "I learned from watching you," I said before I could stop myself. "You never let anyone make you feel small. I figured if I am going to survive being your wife, I should probably do the same." Don De Luca looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You are learning faster than I expected. That pleases me." "I am not trying to please you," I replied, but the words came out softer than I intended. "I know," Don De Luca said, and for the first time since I met him, he smiled at me with something that might have been genuine warmth. "That is part of what makes you interesting." Over the following weeks, I noticed one evening, we were sitting in Don De Luca's private study after dinner, drinking wine and discussing my progress with Italian. I had been reading Dante's Inferno in the original, struggling through the archaic language, but determined to prove I was not the uneducated American everyone assumed. Don De Luca listened to me stumbling through a passage, then gently corrected my pronunciation. His hand brushed mine as he pointed to a word, and I felt electricity shoot up my arm. I pulled away quickly, startled by my own reaction. Don De Luca noticed. His dark eyes studied my face. "You are still afraid of me," he said quietly. "Yes," I admitted. "You control everything about my life. You bought me like property. Why would I not be afraid?" "Because I have not hurt you," Don De Luca said. "Because I have kept every promise I made, given you freedom within the boundaries of this life, treated you with respect despite having every right to demand obedience. What more must I do to prove I am not your enemy?" "You could let me go," I said, but there was less conviction in my voice than there should have been. Don De Luca set down his wine glass and moved closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the faint silver stubble on his jaw. "I will never let you go. You are mine, Olivia. But that does not mean you must be my prisoner. It could mean something else entirely if you would allow it." "What could it possibly mean?" I whispered, my body frozen between the urge to flee and something else I did not want to name. "It could mean partnership," Don De Luca said. "It could mean mutual respect and protection and the kind of loyalty that builds empires. It could mean that you stop seeing yourself as captured and start seeing yourself as chosen." "I did not choose this," I protested, but my voice was weak. "No," Don De Luca agreed, "but you can choose what it becomes from here. You can choose to remain my reluctant bride, or you can choose to become my willing wife. Either way, I will treasure you. But one path leads to coldness and distance. The other leads to something more." His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheek with surprising tenderness. I knew I should pull away, should maintain the anger that had sustained me through these terrible weeks. But instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my body betraying the walls my mind had built. Don De Luca's eyes darkened with something that looked like triumph and desire mixed together, and he leaned forward slowly, giving me time to move away. I did not move away. When his lips met mine, it was nothing like the brief kiss at our wedding. This was hungry and possessive and claiming, a kiss that demanded response and promised things I was not ready to think about. I kissed him back before I could stop myself, my hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath expensive fabric. Don De Luca pulled me closer, one arm wrapping around my waist while the other hand tangled in my hair, and I felt something inside me begin to crack and crumble. I pulled away suddenly, breathing hard, my eyes wide with shock at my own response. Don De Luca let me go immediately, though his eyes remained dark with barely controlled desire. I stood up on shaking legs, backing away from him. "I cannot do this. You are the man who bought me. You are my captor. I cannot want you." "But you do," Don De Luca said, his voice rough. "I can see it in your eyes, feel it in how you responded. You want me as much as I want you, Olivia. And that terrifies you more than anything I have actually done." I turned and fled the room, not caring how it looked, needing distance before I did something I could not take back. I heard Don De Luca call my name, but did not stop, running through the villa's halls until I reached the bedroom and locked myself inside. I leaned against the door, my heart racing and my body still humming from that kiss, hating myself for the truth in his words. The next morning, Don De Luca was distant and controlled, treating me with polite courtesy that somehow hurt worse than anger would have. He informed me that he would be traveling for business for 3 days and that I would remain at the villa under guard. I wanted to be relieved by his absence, but instead I felt bereft in a way that made no sense. I threw myself into my training and studies, pushing my body until Marco finally called a halt and insisted I rest before I injured myself. On the second day of Don De Luca's absence, I was practicing Italian conversation with my tutor when I heard shouting from downstairs. Guards rushed past the study room, their weapons drawn, and my tutor went pale. "Stay here," the woman whispered. But my training kicked in before conscious thought. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk and moved to the door, listening. More shouting, this time closer. The sound of something breaking. Then gunshots, sharp cracks that made my ears ring even from a distance. The tutor screamed and dropped to the floor, covering her head. My mind raced through my options. Hide and hope the guards won the fight, or run and try to find a way out during the chaos. I chose neither. Instead, I positioned myself behind the door with the paperweight raised, exactly as Marco had taught me. The door burst open and a man rushed in, weapon drawn and eyes wild. He saw the tutor on the floor and grabbed her, using her as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. I moved without thinking, exactly as my training had drilled into me. I struck hard at the pressure point below his ear, and when he turned in surprise, I brought the paperweight down on his gun hand with all my strength. The man screamed and dropped the weapon, and I kicked it away before he could recover. Then I drove my knee into his groin and shoved him backward, sending him crashing into the wall. By the time Don De Luca's guards burst into the room, I was standing over the wounded intruder, paperweight still in hand, my entire body shaking with adrenaline. The guards stared at me in shock, then quickly secured the attacker and escorted me to Don De Luca's personal quarters, the most defensible location in the villa. Rosa appeared with blankets and tea, fussing over me like I was precious crystal rather than a captive bride. Don De Luca returned within 2 hours, his helicopter landing on the villa's grounds with the kind of speed that suggested he had broken every aviation regulation to get there. He burst into his quarters where I sat wrapped in blankets, his face a mask of controlled fury that melted into relief the moment he saw me unharmed. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You are safe," he kept saying, the words almost like a prayer. "You are safe." I should have pushed him away, should have maintained the distance I had been trying to rebuild. Instead, I clung to him, my face buried against his chest, breathing in the scent of him and letting his solid presence ground me. When Don De Luca finally pulled back to examine my face, his hands gentle on my shoulders, I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. "They came for you. Because you are mine. Because they knew hurting you would hurt me more than any attack on my person could. This is my fault." I fought back, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I am not helpless, Vincent. You made sure of that." Don De Luca's expression shifted to something I had never seen before, a mixture of pride and possessiveness and something deeper that made my chest ache. "You used your training. You protected yourself and likely saved your tutor's life. You are magnificent, Olivia. Fierce and brave and completely unexpected." His hands came up to frame my face. And this time when he kissed me, it was different from before. This kiss was not about claiming or proving a point. It was about relief and fear and the bone-deep need to confirm that I was real and alive. And as I kissed him back without reservation, my walls finally crumbling under the weight of everything that had happened, everything I had been denying. Don De Luca lifted me without breaking the kiss, carrying me to his bedroom, the one I had never been allowed to enter. He laid me down on the massive bed with a gentleness that contradicted everything I thought I knew about him. His hands roamed over my body, checking for injuries I did not have, his eyes dark with desire and concern. I reached up and pulled him down to me. Done with fighting. Done with pretending I did not want this. What followed was tender and intense and overwhelming. Don De Luca worshipped me with his hands and mouth, taking his time despite the urgency I could feel vibrating through his body. When we finally came together, I cried out, not from pain, but from the intensity of feeling connected to this man who I had hated and feared and now wanted with a desperation that terrified me. Don De Luca whispered to me in Italian, words I was not fluent enough to fully understand, but the emotion behind them needed no translation. Afterward, he held me against his chest, his hand stroking my hair with gentle repetition. I waited for regret to set in, for reality to reassert itself and remind me that this man had bought me like property. But all I felt was safe and cherished and terrifyingly content. I fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time since arriving in Italy, I slept deeply and without nightmares. I woke the next morning to find Don De Luca watching me, propped up on one elbow with an expression on his face that made my breath catch. You are beautiful when you sleep, unguarded and peaceful. I want to see you like that always. I sat up, pulling the sheet around myself, suddenly uncertain about what last night meant for our strange relationship. Don De Luca seemed to read my thoughts because he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I will not let you pull away again. Last night changed things between us. You can deny it if you wish, but your body told me everything I needed to know. I do not know what I feel, I admitted. You are still the man who forced me into this marriage. And you are still the woman who kissed me back, who chose to stay in my bed rather than flee to your own room, who responded to me with passion and need. We can acknowledge the difficult beginning while still choosing to build something real from here. Or you can continue fighting what is inevitable. I wanted to argue but could not find the words. The truth was that something had fundamentally shifted last night. I could no longer see Don De Luca as just my captor. He was also the man who had spent months earning my trust slowly, who had protected and trained me, who had looked genuinely terrified when I was in danger. The situation was still wrong, still forced, still far from any fairy tale. But it was also becoming something I could not quite hate anymore. Over the next few weeks, Don De Luca and I fell into a new rhythm. I moved into his bedroom permanently, though we both pretended it was about security rather than desire. We spent evenings talking about everything and nothing, him sharing stories from his long life, and me describing my dreams for the future. He asked what I wanted to study if I could return to school, and when I said art history, he quietly arranged for a private tutor to continue my education. The physical relationship between us deepened as well. Don De Luca was an attentive lover, learning my body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. I found myself craving his touch, looking forward to the nights when we would come together with increasing familiarity and passion. I still struggled with the morality of it all, with the fact that this relationship had been built on force and debt. But I could not deny that what we shared now felt real regardless of how it began. 2 months after the attack on the villa, I missed my period. I told myself it was stress, the change in environment, anything except the obvious. But when I missed the second one, I could no longer ignore the possibility. Rosa noticed my morning nausea and brought me a pregnancy test with a knowing smile. I stared at the positive result for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of emotions I could not begin to untangle. I told Don De Luca that evening, my voice shaking with uncertainty. He went very still, his eyes dropping to my still flat stomach. And for a moment, I saw vulnerability flash across his face before he locked it down. A child. My child. Are you certain? As certain as a test can make me, I replied. I know this was part of the arrangement, but I did not think it would happen so quickly. I do not know if I am ready. Don De Luca pulled me into his arms, his hands playing protectively over my stomach. You will be an extraordinary mother, and I will be here for every moment. This child will know love and security and will never doubt their worth. The conviction in his voice made my eyes burn with tears. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was not just survival, but actual family. Don De Luca had begun softening months ago, but the news of the pregnancy transformed him completely. He became almost obsessive about my health and safety, hiring a private doctor to monitor me constantly, adjusting my diet and schedule, limiting my activities in ways that would have infuriated me if not for the genuine care behind every restriction. The pregnancy also brought my father back into the picture. Robert Hayes had been quietly relocated to a small apartment in Milan after the wedding. His debt erased, but his relationship with me fractured beyond easy repair. When he heard about the pregnancy, he showed up at the villa uninvited, demanding to see his daughter. Don De Luca had him escorted to the sitting room where I waited, my hand protectively over my small baby bump. The confrontation was painful but necessary. I told my father exactly how I felt about being sold, about his cowardice and selfishness. He tried to justify his choices, to explain the impossible position he had been in, but I cut him off. You sacrificed me to save yourself. That is the truth, and nothing you say will change it. I am building a life here now, a family. You can be part of it only if you can accept that I do not forgive you, and I may never forgive you. But I am willing to let you be a grandfather to this child if you can earn that privilege. My father left in tears, but something had shifted. I had taken back power in that relationship. I had drawn boundaries that he would have to respect. Don De Luca watched the entire exchange from the doorway, pride evident in his expression. You are stronger than you know. You face difficult things head-on rather than running. That is a gift. As my pregnancy progressed, Don De Luca made a decision that shocked everyone in his organization. He began the process of stepping back from the criminal enterprises that had built his empire. He started transferring control to trusted lieutenants, liquidating the most dangerous operations, and shifting his focus to legitimate businesses. When his second-in-command questioned the decision, Don De Luca simply said that he wanted his child to grow up with a father, not a funeral. I watched this transformation with amazement. He was dismantling the very things that had defined him for decades, all because he wanted to be a better father than his past would allow. It was not a complete departure from power. Don De Luca would always be connected to that world in ways that could not be fully erased. But it was an honest attempt at something better, and that meant more to me than any romantic gesture could have. 6 months into the pregnancy, Don De Luca took me to the Amalfi Coast, to a villa he owned that overlooked the sea. The property was stunning. All white stone and blue tiles and views that made my artist's heart sing. This is yours, he told me. A place where you can be free from my world. Where you and our child can be safe. I am transferring the deed into your name alone. I understood what he was really saying. This was my escape route if I ever needed it. My insurance policy against his past coming back to destroy us. The gesture was more meaningful than any declaration of love could be because it gave me real power. Real choice. I kissed him on the terrace overlooking the sea. And for the first time, I said the words I had been holding back. I love you. Don De Luca's expression cracked, revealing the depth of emotion he usually kept locked away. I have loved you since the moment you stood up to Marcello Rossi at that party. Since the moment I realized you were not afraid to be fierce in a room full of predators. You have changed me in ways I did not think possible at my age, Olivia. You have given me reason to become better than I was. Our daughter was born on a warm spring evening. Her cries filled the villa with life and hope. Don De Luca held her with shaking hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he counted her tiny fingers and marveled at her perfect features. We named her Sophia Rosa, after my grandmother and Rosa, the woman who had helped me survive those first terrible weeks. I watched Don De Luca with our daughter and felt my heart expand in ways I had not known were possible. This man who had bought me, trapped me, and forced me into marriage had also given me security, protection, and eventually genuine love. Our story was not conventional or morally simple, but it was ours and it was real. 2 years later, we were married again, this time in a ceremony I chose. I wore a dress I picked myself, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, including my father, who I had slowly allowed back into my life after months of difficult conversations. Don De Luca stood at the altar watching me walk toward him, and when I reached his side, he whispered that I was the most beautiful thing he had ever claimed as his. We claimed each other, I corrected, and I meant it. What had begun as a transaction forced by debt and desperation had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, passionate love, and the kind of loyalty that could withstand anything. We had a son the following year, a healthy boy with his father's dark eyes and my fierce spirit. Don De Luca scaled back even further from his old life, focusing on our family and the legitimate empire he was building for our children. I completed my degree remotely and began curating for a small gallery in Palermo, finding purpose beyond survival for the first time since arriving in Italy. On our 5th wedding anniversary, we stood on the terrace of our Amalfi Coast villa, watching our children play in the garden below. Don De Luca wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. If you could go back and change things, would you? I was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly. I regret how it began. I regret the fear and the force and the lack of choice. But I do not regret where we ended up. You became the man you needed to be for me, and I became strong enough to stand beside you. That is worth something. It is worth everything, Don De Luca said, pressing a kiss to my temple. You are worth everything. I turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting salt air and expensive wine and the complicated love we had built from impossible circumstances. I had been 20 when I was sold to a man who was almost 70. I had not screamed then because I had not fully understood what was happening. But if someone asked me now what I had learned from it all, I would say this. Sometimes the worst beginning can lead to the most unexpected happiness. And sometimes the man who claims you is also the man who sets you free. Thank you for listening to Olivia and Vincent's story. If this touched your heart, if it made you believe that even the darkest situations can lead to something beautiful, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Olivia's place? Would you have fought until the end? Or would you have found a way to see the humanity in the man who claimed you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are hungry for another tale of forbidden love and dangerous men, I have something special coming next week. A story about a young woman who thought she was marrying a billionaire for his money, only to discover on her wedding night that her new husband was hiding a secret far darker than anything she could have imagined. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. Tap that button, turn on notifications, and I will see you in the next story. Until then, remember that love is not always where you expect to find it. And sometimes the most dangerous men are the ones who need love the most.